Hello and welcome. Tonight we travel into a story that history rarely tells in full. We know the great battles, the tanks, the generals, and the flags raised over smoking cities. But behind those headlines marched another army. An army without medals, without parades, without the memory they deserve. These were the women of World War II. Nurses who stitched life together with trembling hands, spies who carried coded messages through the night, workers who kept the wheels of war turning when men were gone, mothers, daughters, sisters, strangers, millions who gave everything and yet remain unnamed. If Antietam was America's bloodiest day, then World War II was humanity's longest night. And in that night, the forgotten women lit small fires of courage that still burn, though most of their names have faded. This is their story, told in whispers, shadows, and echoes. The year 1939. The world holds its breath. Empires stretch across oceans. Cities glow with light that will soon be darkened. Women sew, cook, pray, yet war is already whispering their names. While leaders sign treaties, another army quietly awakens. An army of women, unarmed but unyielding. Here lies the beginning of a forgotten front, one written in ink, blood, and silence. In hospitals across Europe, women stand ready. White uniforms freshly pressed, faces calm though their hearts pound. They know war will come to their wards. They do not yet know how quickly. In Poland, bombs fall on Warsaw, and nurses carry children into basements while fire reigns overhead. In Britain, thousands enroll in the voluntary aid detachment, ready to dress wounds and comfort the dying. Across the ocean in the Philippines, American and Filipino nurses prepare jungle outposts, unaware they will soon be prisoners of war. They do not carry rifles, but their weapons are needles, bandages, and the will to keep breathing bodies alive when everything else collapses. One woman bends over a soldier whose chest is torn by shrapnel. Her hands steady, her voice soft. She hums a lullaby learned in childhood. Around her, chaos. Yet in that small corner, life clings because she refuses to let it go. This is the unseen battle. One wound, one patient, one heartbeat at a time. Meanwhile, the factories awaken. Steel doors roll open, machines roar to life, men vanish into uniforms, and women step into the empty spaces they leave behind. The assembly line is their battlefield. Sparks fly as they weld metal. Sweat pours as they lift crates. A rivet gun hammers, echoing like artillery. In America, the figure of Rosie the Riveter smiles from posters, but behind that smile are millions of tired hands and aching backs. In the Soviet Union, women forge tanks in bitter cold, their breath freezing on the steel. In Japan, schoolgirls are conscripted into munitions plants, filling shells with trembling fingers. Each bullet that leaves the front, each plane that lifts into the sky, bears their unseen imprint. And yet, some women fight not with steel or stitches, but with silence. The world of shadows is theirs. A Parisian woman walks with a basket of bread. Hidden beneath the loaves is a pistol. She greets a German soldier with a smile, her eyes betraying nothing. That night, she carries messages written in invisible ink. Another woman bends over a radio in a dark attic, headphones pressed tight, fingers tapping out codes across the airwaves. Her name is Noor Inayat Khan, daughter of an Indian mystic and a British mother. She becomes one of the first female radio operators sent into occupied France. She knows the Gestapo hunts her. She sends her signals anyway until capture silences her voice forever. There is also Nancy Wake, the white mouse, who slips through Gestapo nets again and again. She leads resistance fighters through forests, her courage so sharp the enemy places a bounty on her head. And Vera Atkins, the spy mistress who guides networks of women into enemy territory, knowing too many will never return. Their war is fought in whispers, footsteps, shadows, and it demands a price few can pay. But resistance is not only spies and codes. It is also mothers who poison Nazi supplies with quiet hands. It is grandmothers who hide Jewish children beneath their floorboards. It is young girls who carry rifles for partisans in Yugoslavia, Greece, and China. In mountain villages, in occupied towns, in forests thick with smoke, women refuse to bow. Some are executed in public squares, others vanish into prisons. Most are remembered only by the families they left behind. And yet, not all memory is proud. There are the women whose voices were stolen, who endured horrors beyond measure. Across Asia, hundreds of thousands are forced into military brothels as comfort women, their suffering silenced for decades, their names erased from official history. In Europe, women in concentration camps endure experiments, starvation, humiliation. Dr. Gisela Perl, a Hungarian Jewish gynecologist, works in Auschwitz. Surrounded by death, she secretly saves lives, performing impossible surgeries with no tools, no medicine, only courage and will. Her battlefield is despair, and she fights it one soul at a time. Still, the skies too belong to women. In the Soviet Union, Young aviators climb into fragile wooden planes. They are called the night witches by the Germans, who fear the sound of their engines whispering through the darkness. Dropping bombs in silence, they harass the enemy night after night, their bravery legendary though their recognition remains scarce. In America, women pilots ferry bombers across the continent, though they are barred from combat. In Britain, ATA pilots deliver Spitfires, navigating storms without weapons. Each flight is a gamble, but they take the controls with steady hands. The sky, once forbidden, becomes theirs through sheer defiance. And the war is not confined to Europe. Across the colonies, women fight, march, and endure. In India, Lakshmi Sahgal forms the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, the women's army of Subhas Chandra Bose, fighting for independence as much as against empire. In Burma, nurses flee through jungles, barefoot and starving, yet carrying the wounded. In Africa, women sustain camps, feed soldiers, and work the land abandoned by men at war. In the Caribbean, they labor on docks and plantations, loading supplies for distant fronts. The empire calls, and its daughters answer, though history seldom speaks their name. And then the war comes home. Bombs fall on London, children are carried into shelters. Firestorms rage in Dresden, mothers clutching children as flames consume whole streets. In Nanjing, in Manila, in Tokyo, women dig through rubble, searching for family beneath broken stone. They cook meals over open fires in ruins, hold funerals in silence, rebuild lives from ashes. For them, war is not distant. It is at the door, at the table, in the cradle. At last, in 1945, the guns fall silent. Flags rise. Armies march home. Victory is declared, and women who carried nations on their shoulders are told to step back. Factories close their gates. Uniforms are folded away. Nurses return to kitchens. Pilots are grounded. Spies slip back into anonymity. Some write memoirs, but most remain silent. Their service unacknowledged. Their sacrifices unspoken. History remembers the generals, the treaties, the monuments, but in quiet cemeteries, in family stories whispered at night, in the fragile memories of survivors, the women remain. They did not ask for glory. They asked only to serve, to endure, to protect. Yet their absence from the grand story of the war is its deepest wound. And so tonight, as you close your eyes, remember them. The nurses who held dying hands, the workers who forged steel in midnight shifts, the spies who walked into darkness and did not return, the mothers who shielded children with their own bodies, the voices silenced but not lost. They are still here, in the echoes of memory, in the world they helped save, forgotten by monuments, but never by history itself. White uniforms stained crimson. Field hospitals echo with groans, the air thick with smoke, sweat, and the metallic sting of blood. Women bending over broken bodies, their hands trembling but steady, their faces composed, though inside they fight against despair. The war has many fronts, but for these women, the front lines run through every tent, every ward, every stretcher carried in from the battlefield. Their battle is against infection, against shock, against time itself. They carry no rifles, yet they march into the storm of suffering every single day. In Poland, bombs fall on Warsaw, buildings crumble, streets shatter, and yet within the shattered city, a woman walks quietly, her face unremarkable to those who do not know her. Her name is Irina Sendler. While soldiers march and guns fire, she wages her own defiance, smuggling Jewish children out of the ghettos. In boxes, in sacks, beneath wagons, she hides them, carrying them away from death toward the fragile hope of life. A nurse in title, but a savior in practice, she risks her life not once, but hundreds of times. Each child saved is a victory carved out of despair. History often tells the story of battles, but here, victory is measured in a heartbeat, in a child's cry that might have been silenced forever. Across the Channel in Britain, the spirit of Elsie Inglis lingers. She had died before this war began, but her legacy breathes through every nurse who takes up her place. A suffragist, a doctor, a woman who built hospitals for soldiers when governments told her to stay home. Her determination becomes a torch carried forward by a new generation of women in uniform. They enter air raid shelters to treat the wounded after bombs fall on London. They stand in operating theaters as blitz fires rage outside. Their work is relentless, their courage unseen by most, but their hands keep the nation's pulse alive. Further east, the Pacific turns into a crucible. On Bataan and Corregidor, American and Filipino nurses endure what soldiers later call the death march. They are not spared because they are women. Disease sweeps through camps, supplies vanish, medicine dwindles. And still these nurses stay, carrying the wounded, whispering comfort, refusing to abandon their patients even as Japanese forces close in. They are captured, imprisoned, starved. Yet even in captivity they continue to heal. In makeshift huts with no supplies, they improvise with scraps, roots, torn cloth. Their determination is a rebellion against despair. In Australia, in Canada, in the Soviet Union, in China, the story repeats. Women step into uniforms that are not glamorous, not celebrated, but necessary. They kneel on blood-soaked ground, they bind wounds with hands raw from washing bandages in icy water. They face the constant risk of bombing raids, of advancing armies, of disease, yet they do not run. When others flee, they stay. Imagine the ward at midnight. A candle flickers because there is no electricity. On the bed, a young soldier gasps, his body broken. The nurse bends close, whispering words he cannot hear but somehow feels. She presses his hand, her other hand steady with a syringe of morphine. Around her, the groans of dozens more fill the night. She is exhausted, her feet blistered, her eyes heavy, yet she moves to the next bed and then the next. This is her war. No parades, no medals, just the endless line of suffering and the quiet, stubborn refusal to surrender to it. Not all these women were professional nurses. Many were volunteers drawn from homes, schools, farms. Housewives who learned to bandage wounds, teachers who became medics overnight, teenagers who had never left their villages, suddenly thrust into the carnage of global war. Some fainted the first time they saw torn flesh, but they returned again and again until their hands no longer shook. War remade them into healers forged by necessity. Their sacrifices often meant facing death without weapon or shield. In France, when German soldiers raided field hospitals, nurses stood between the enemy and their patients. Some were shot, others arrested, but many refused to abandon the wounded. In the Soviet Union, nurses crawled under sniper fire to drag soldiers from the front lines, sometimes carrying men larger than themselves across frozen fields. Their strength was not brute force, it was will, the unyielding determination that no man should be left to die alone. Beyond the battlefield, their service reached into the silent corners of war. In ghettos, in refugee camps, in bombed-out cities, women carried medicine from door to door, risking their lives for neighbors, strangers, children. They fought against typhus, against hunger, against despair itself. They were often the last barrier between life and death when states collapsed and armies withdrew. Some of their names remain. Clara Maas, remembered for giving her life in the fight against disease decades before, became an inspiration during the war. Edith Cavell, executed in World War I for aiding prisoners, was invoked as a martyr, reminding nurses of the price their calling might demand. But most names vanish, recorded in no book, carved on no stone. Their stories linger only in family memories, in faded photographs, in letters stained with tears. And yet, without them, the war would have consumed even more. Without them, countless wounded would have died. Without them, despair would have swallowed nations. Picture a train station in 1940. The platform crowded with the injured, soldiers leaning on one another, children crying for mothers who are gone. In the center, nurses move swiftly. One ties a bandage with a strip torn from her own skirt. Another lifts a child into her arms. A third shouts orders that cut through the chaos, her voice steady while the world shakes. They have no rifles, but they hold the line. This is their battle, invisible to strategy maps, uncounted in casualty reports, but essential to survival. And still, their trials did not end when the fighting paused. Many carried scars that were invisible, the smell of blood that never left their nostrils, the nightmares of screams that followed them into old age, the memory of patients who died in their arms, faces that could not be forgotten. They bore these silently, rarely honored, rarely acknowledged. Some returned home to families who never asked about the war. Others returned to countries that offered no recognition, no pension, no thanks, yet they had carried nations on their shoulders. Think of the Pacific nurse, thin from starvation, standing at liberation with tears in her eyes, not because she is free, but because she has kept her promise to care for her patients until the very end. Think of the British nurse emerging from a bombed hospital, her uniform torn, her body covered in dust, yet already turning back to search for survivors. Think of the Soviet medic crawling across the battlefield in snow, pulling a wounded soldier to safety, her own body riddled with frostbite, refusing to stop until he breathes again. These are not myths, they are history, but history often forgets. As the war ended in 1945, their work faded back into the shadows. Some continued in hospitals, others returned to ordinary lives. Many were never asked about their service, never thanked, never remembered. They were told to move on, to return to kitchens, to raise children, as if their courage had been a passing duty rather than the backbone of survival. Their medals, when awarded, gathered dust in drawers. Their stories, when told, were overshadowed by the narratives of generals and battles. Yet without them, the world that emerged from the war might not have survived at all. So when we think of war, we must also think of them. Not just the guns and tanks, but the women who bent over broken bodies, who whispered comfort in the darkest nights, who stitched wounds and saved children, who gave their lives not in the blaze of combat, but in the quiet, unyielding service of healing. They carried nations, not with banners and speeches, but with gauze, with morphine, with love in the face of horror. Their legacy is not carved into monuments, but it lives in every heartbeat they saved, in every life that carried forward because they refused to give up. And tonight, as we close our eyes, we remember them. The nurses who stood when the world collapsed, the women who healed in the midst of destruction, the forgotten army of compassion whose strength was greater than steel, and whose courage endures even when their names do not. Smoke pours from factories, the air thick with dust, oil, and the hum of machines that never rest. Assembly lines stretch like rivers of iron, their rhythm steady, relentless, like the beating of a great heart. Women fill the spaces once held by men. Their footsteps echo on factory floors, their hands grip tools that blister their skin, their eyes focus on precision because mistakes here can mean death far away on the front. They hammer rivets into steel, sparks flying like miniature fireworks. They stitch parachutes with needles flashing in the dim light. They forge bullets by the millions, their fingers quick, their backs bent, their bodies aching. They pilot aircraft across oceans, ferrying the machines of war where they are needed most. They do all this not for glory, not for recognition, but because the world has demanded it of them. Rosie the Riveter appears in posters, her rolled sleeves and flexed arm telling the world we can do it. She smiles from billboards and magazines, a symbol of strength. But behind that smile is a truth far grittier. Behind Rosie stand millions, women whose names we do not know, whose uniforms were coveralls stained with oil, whose shifts stretched 14 hours, whose pay was half that of the men they replaced. Anonymous, silent, unseen. They are the real Rosie, the army of workers who built the skeleton of war. In Detroit, the great auto plants no longer produce cars. Instead, tanks rumble off the assembly lines, their steel frames touched by the hands of women who had once sewn dresses or typed letters. Each turret, each bolt tightened, each wheel turned by those who had never before stepped inside a factory. They learn quickly. They have no choice. The war demands skill, speed, endurance. They deliver. In the shipyards of California, women weld steel plates under the blazing sun. The air fills with the clang of hammers, the shriek of metal under flame. They wear masks that hide their faces, but beneath those masks are mothers, daughters, widows. Some lost sons already to the war, and now they build the ships that carry other sons across the ocean. Sparks leap like stars around them. Their work is hot, dangerous, exhausting, but every ship they finish is a lifeline to soldiers far from home. Across the Atlantic, Soviet women labor in freezing factories. The Volga freezes outside, but inside, furnaces roar and machines thunder. They build tanks with hands raw and cracked from cold. They push their bodies past hunger, past exhaustion, knowing that each tank rolling onto the battlefield might hold the line against German forces pressing ever deeper. Some women sleep on factory floors, unwilling to waste time traveling home. They wake to the same rhythm of steel, their hair tied back, their bodies thin from rationing, but their will unbroken. In Britain, women work in munitions plants, filling shells with TNT, their skin turning yellow from chemical exposure. They are called the Canary Girls, their bodies poisoned by the very work that fuels the war. Many will suffer illnesses that last the rest of their lives, yet they keep going, filling shell after shell, knowing that soldiers at the front depend on them. Their laughter rings in the canteens, their songs echo across factory yards. But behind the smiles is the knowledge of risk, the explosions that sometimes rip through plants, killing dozens in an instant. In Japan, schoolgirls are sent into factories, their youth traded for labor. They roll gunpowder into shells, stitch uniforms, build aircraft parts. Some collapse from exhaustion, some from hunger, but the demand never stops. The empire requires sacrifice, and the young are not spared. Their hands, once meant to hold books or toys, now feed the engines of war. From Karachi to Detroit, from Manchester to Moscow, from Tokyo to Melbourne, the story repeats. Factories become battlefields of their own, not marked on any map, not celebrated in grand speeches, but vital. Each rivet, each bullet, each parachute stitched carries the imprint of women who gave their strength in silence. But their work is not only in steel and smoke. Some women rise into the skies, ferrying planes across oceans. In America, the women Air Force service pilots, the WASPs, take the controls of bombers and fighters. They deliver aircraft from factories to air bases, freeing male pilots for combat. They train with discipline, fly with skill, and yet they are denied military status, denied recognition. Some die in crashes, their bodies returned home without honors, their service barely acknowledged. Still they fly, because the planes must reach the front, and they are the ones who can do it. In Britain, the Air Transport Auxiliary employs women pilots to ferry Spitfires, Hurricanes, bombers. They climb into cockpits designed for taller bodies, heavier hands. They fly through storms, through fog, through skies darkened by war. No weapons, no radios, often no maps. They trust their instincts, their courage, and the compass on the panel before them. The men at the airfield sometimes scoff, sometimes doubt, but when the women land the plane smoothly, engines roaring, the doubt fades into silence. War work is not only in factories and skies. In the fields, women bend to plant, harvest, gather. The Women's Land Army in Britain takes up plows and hoes, feeding a nation under siege. In America, women farmers supply armies abroad. In Soviet villages, women labor in fields even as shells fall nearby, because hunger kills as surely as bullets. Their backs ache, their hands blister, their faces burn under sun and wind. Yet without their crops, without their food, the soldiers at the front cannot fight. And in offices, women tap out reports, decode enemy messages, design blueprints. They fill the desks left empty by men. They keep the machinery of government, of intelligence, of industry alive. Each file organized, each message sent, each calculation made contributes to the vast machine of war. The weight is immense, the hours long, the pay unfair, yet they endure, because behind every soldier on the front, there is a woman in a factory, in a field, in an office, carrying her share of the war. And though some stories have names, most do not. We remember Rosie the Riveter, though she was never a single person. We remember the night witches who flew, the nurses who healed, but for the millions who worked in anonymity, history has no place. Their labor is buried under the triumphs of generals and the strategies of leaders. Their calloused hands are forgotten. But if we look closely, we see them still, in the faded photographs of women in overalls, smiling despite exhaustion, in the old film reels of ships sliding into the sea, christened by hands that built them, in the yellowed letters written by factory girls to brothers at the front, in the memories passed down quietly, generation to generation. They did not fight with guns, they did not storm beaches or charge trenches, yet without them, the war could not have been fought. Their work was the foundation on which battles were built. Every bomb dropped, every plane flown, every tank that rolled forward bore their fingerprints. And when the war ended, many were told to step aside, to leave the factories, to surrender their tools, to return to kitchens and nurseries. Some resisted, some accepted, but all carried the memory of what they had done. For a moment, they had been the beating heart of industry, the lifeline of nations. Then suddenly, they were expected to forget. But memory does not vanish so easily. It lingers in the stories told to children, in the pride of a grandmother who once built ships or stitched parachutes. It lingers in the quiet knowledge that when the world was on fire, they held it together with their hands, their sweat, their courage. Smoke still rises in the imagination. The hum of assembly lines still echoes in memory. Women hammering rivets, stitching parachutes, forging bullets, piloting planes, harvesting fields. From Karachi to Detroit, from Moscow to Tokyo, their war was fought not with weapons but with work. And though history often forgets, tonight we remember. We remember the women at the loom of war work who wove survival out of steel, cloth, and endless determination. Paris streets at midnight, the lamps dimmed, the shutters closed, the air thick with fear. Boots echo on cobblestones, patrols scanning for any flicker of defiance. But behind drawn curtains, behind ordinary doors, another war hums alive. Radios crackle in secret, their signals darting across the night sky. Messages tapped under tables, hidden beneath coded phrases, disguised in recipes or children's drawings. Women of courage walk quietly through the darkness. They carry papers in handbags, pistols in bread loaves, cyanide capsules tucked into hems of dresses. Their smiles hide secrets. Their silence is a weapon sharper than steel. Nancy Wake moves swiftly, her heels clicking against pavement that hides no trace of her true identity. To the Germans, she becomes the white mouse, slipping from their grasp again and again, impossible to catch. She laughs loudly, drinks with officers, flirts her way past suspicion, only to vanish and reappear leading resistance fighters in the mountains. She is fierce, ruthless when needed, carrying messages and coordinating sabotage with a fire that terrifies the enemy. The bounty on her head grows, yet she continues, fearless, driven. She fights not only with guns and grenades, but with wit, charm, and an unbreakable spirit. Far quieter, though no less courageous, is Noor Inayat Khan. A Sufi princess, a gentle soul who loved music and children's stories, she becomes one of Britain's first female radio operators sent into occupied France. Her work is perilous. Radios are bulky, their signals traceable within minutes. Each transmission is a race against time. She sits in an attic, headphones pressed to her ears, her fingers tapping codes that carry life and death across the ether. She knows the Gestapo is hunting her. She knows capture means torture. Yet she stays, refusing to abandon her post even as networks around her collapse. For weeks she holds the line, until betrayal delivers her into enemy hands. Imprisoned, beaten, interrogated, she says nothing. Silence becomes her final defiance. Even in her last moments, she whispers only one word: freedom. Then there is Vera Atkin, not a spy in the field, but a spy mistress, orchestrating networks across Europe from the shadows of London. She recruits, trains, guides. Many of the women she sends into France never return. She carries their memories with a heavy heart, their names etched into her mind like scars. When the war ends, she searches tirelessly for their fates, piecing together the fragments of lives lost in Ravensbrück, Dachau, and other camps. She becomes their voice when the world is eager to forget. Her war is not only in strategy, but in memory, ensuring that the women who vanished are not erased completely. But these are only a few names among thousands. Across Europe, women take up the cloak of secrecy. In Belgium, couriers ride bicycles through occupied villages, hidden compartments carrying maps, documents, even small weapons. In Holland, school teachers hide resistance messages in children's books. In Denmark, women ferry Jews to safety across dark waters in fishing boats. In Greece, in Yugoslavia, in Poland, women stand watch at crossroads, signaling with scarves and lanterns, guiding partisans through forests. They are farmers, nurses, students, housewives, ordinary lives transformed into extraordinary risks. Every meeting is dangerous. Every word spoken might be overheard. Every glance exchanged could be a death sentence. They live on the edge of discovery, where a single mistake can unravel entire networks. Some are caught, tortured, executed. Some vanish without trace, their graves unmarked, their stories untold, yet spread. The tools of their trade are deceptively simple: lipstick tubes that conceal microfilm, laundry lines strung with coded signals, messages sewn into hems, baked into loaves of bread, folded into cigarette papers, radios disguised as suitcases, typewriters that hide ciphers. Their invisibility is their strength. They walk past soldiers who never guess the secrets carried in a smile, the danger hidden in a basket of groceries. And yet, invisibility also means erasure. After the war, many of these women returned to obscurity, their deeds classified, their names omitted from official histories. They fade back into quiet lives, carrying memories too heavy to share, too painful to recount. Some speak only decades later when age loosens the silence. Others die without recognition, their courage buried with them. Consider the courage it took to say yes when offered the chance, to know that survival was unlikely, that capture meant horror, and yet to accept anyway, to leave family, friends, safety, and walk willingly into enemy territory armed with nothing but a codebook and courage. These women did not march in parades, they did not wear visible medals. Their uniforms were dresses, skirts, headscarves, their battlefield the crowded streets of Paris, the quiet cafes of Lyon, the narrow alleys of Warsaw. Think of the young courier pedaling through the countryside, papers hidden in her bicycle frame. She passes German checkpoints, her face calm though her heart pounds. A soldier waves her through, never knowing that the bundle of clothes in her basket hides instructions for a sabotage operation that will blow up a train that very night. She rides on, breath held, until she disappears into the trees, delivering her secret to waiting hands. Think of the girl in Holland who walks into a cafe with a smile, sits down with soldiers, laughs at their jokes, and slips a folded map under the table to the man across from her. They rise, leave separately, never acknowledging each other. That night, resistance fighters strike using the intelligence she carried in her handbag. She is never credited. Her name never appears in reports, but her act changes the course of life. Think of the radio operator alone in a dark attic, sending messages as the sweep trucks roam the streets, triangulating signals. She knows the window of safety is short. She works quickly, fingers flying, sweat on her brow. Each second could be her last. When the message is sent, she hides the set, wipes her hands, opens the door with a smile for the soldiers who knock, pretending she has been knitting all along. Her life balanced on the edge of performance, her survival dependent on silence and nerves of steel. And beyond Europe, too, women serve in intelligence. In Egypt, in India, in China, they pass messages, intercept communications, decode enemy plans. The global web of war stretches across continents, and women are its invisible threads. But secrecy is double-edged. Because their stories are hidden, Their sacrifices are easily forgotten. While statues rise for generals, their memories remain in whispers. A handful of medals awarded posthumously, a few books written years later, but for most, nothing. They vanish into anonymity just as they work. And yet their courage shaped the war. They disrupted enemy lines, smuggled soldiers to safety, transmitted vital intelligence. They were hunted, captured, killed, and still they continued. Their whispers carried the weight of nations. At Ravensbrück, the camp built for women, many captured spies met their end. Executed quietly, their bodies burned, their names erased. Nor Inayat Khan among them, refusing to betray her comrades, meeting death with dignity. Others too, unknown, unnamed, perished there, their silence their last act of resistance. Even Nancy Wake, who survived, carried scars. She spoke later of the horrors she witnessed, of the brutality she fought against. She drank heavily after the war, haunted by memories. Heroism does not end with peace. It lingers as ghosts, shadows that never fade. These women remind us that war is not only fought with armies and bombs. It is fought in whispers, in secrets carried across streets, in the courage to say nothing under torture, in the choice to risk everything for freedom. They remind us that victory is not only measured in battles won, but in lives saved, messages delivered, and hope kept alive in the darkest nights. Tonight, as we speak of them, we return their names to the light. Nancy Wake, the white mouse who danced past the Gestapo. Noor Inayat Khan, the princess who became a shadow of resistance. Vera Atkins, who remembered when the world forgot. And countless others, couriers, operators, informants, saboteurs, whose faces we may never know, whose voices are lost, but whose courage endures. They carried the war in whispers, and too often they vanished without memorial. But the silence they left behind is not empty. It echoes still if we listen. And in that echo, their courage remains, alive in every story retold, in every shadow that becomes a flame of memory. Occupied villages burn. Smoke rises over tiled roofs. Churches, barns, and homes collapse into ash. Children cry in the streets, their voices trembling against the rumble of tanks and boots. Mothers cradle their little ones close, pressing cheeks to thin hair, whispering promises they cannot keep. And then, slowly, those same hands that once soothed fevers, cooked bread, and brushed tears away, wrap themselves around cold steel. Rifles, pistols, knives, the arms of war passed from husband to widow, from brother to sister, from fallen soldier to grieving mother. The line between protector and fighter dissolved. Across the hills of Yugoslavia, the spirit of Milunka Savic still breathes. A legend of the First World War, she had disguised herself as a man to fight, then stunned generals with her ferocity. Her story echoes among the partisans of the Second World War. Young girls whisper her name like a prayer. Grandmothers recall her courage, and widows, weary but unbowed, take up rifles in her shadow. The forests shelter them. The mountains echo with their steps. They are no longer simply women. They are resistance mothers, guardians of land and blood, warriors of necessity. In Greece, the struggle takes a different shape. Housewives carry baskets to markets, their skirts brushing against cobblestones. Soldiers barely glance at them, dismissing them as harmless, as invisible. But in the folds of those baskets lies death. Poisoned bread, tainted wine, medicines laced with toxins. German supplies vanish mysteriously, and when consumed, they become the silent vengeance of mothers who have lost sons. In village kitchens, resistance brews not only soups and stews, but sabotage. A spoon stirring a pot becomes as powerful as a rifle firing from the hills. China trembles under occupation. Villages suffer raids, fields burn, and families scatter. Women who once bent their backs over rice paddies now march alongside guerrilla fighters, rifles slung across thin shoulders. They march barefoot through mud, climb mountains with swollen feet, and sleep under stars that offer no protection. Their children sometimes walk beside them, sometimes remain behind with elders, sometimes perish on the journey. Grief follows them, but so does fire. They cook for the fighters, they carry ammunition, they bind wounds, and when needed, they pull triggers without hesitation. The invader sees peasants, fragile, powerless. They do not see the storm hidden in every mother's eyes. On farms across Europe, in orchards and vineyards, women become both providers and protectors. They till soil with one hand and bury rifles with the other. They harvest potatoes and pass coded messages through baskets. They milk cows while listening to whispers of resistance news carried on the wind. Grandmothers too old to run still sit at doors watching, warning with subtle signs when enemy soldiers approach. Their gray hair and slow steps disguise sharp eyes and sharper memories. Age is no shield, but it becomes a cloak of invisibility. Who would suspect the old woman at the gate of hiding weapons under her floorboards? Widows take on the fire of vengeance. Husbands gone to war never to return. Sons taken, executed, or dragged into labor camps. Alone, they stand in the ruins of homes, their grief alchemized into fury. They join resistance groups carrying rifles taller than themselves, grenades tucked into aprons. They lay ambushes on country roads, waiting in silence, breathing slowly as the sound of enemy trucks approaches. When the moment comes, they strike without mercy, then vanish into forests. Their names seldom recorded, their deeds often forgotten, yet their courage burns brighter than the fires that consumed their home. In France, some mothers shelter airmen fallen from the skies. They hide them in barns, feed them scraps, risk their lives to pass them along escape lines. Children are taught to remain silent, to play while strangers hide in the attic above their heads. One careless word to a neighbor, one playful shout overheard, could doom them all. Mothers must teach silence as a survival skill, teaching children that secrets weigh more than toys. For these families, bedtime stories are whispered tales of caution, lullabies sung under the hum of enemy planes. In Poland, mothers join underground movements. Some smuggle weapons in prams meant for babies. Others pass resistance papers tucked into loaves of bread. Some disguise themselves as washerwomen, traveling between garrisons, carrying whispers between soldiers. Their children watch from windows as mothers walk into danger with heads held high. Too often, those children never see them return. Execution is the price many pay. Lined against walls, dragged into forests, shot beside ditches, their final sight is often the terrified faces of children forced to watch. The occupiers believe this terror will break the spirit of resistance, but it does the opposite. It hardens it. Every nameless body in a ditch becomes a seed of defiance. Every widow created, every child left motherless strengthens the resolve of those who remain. Some who survive choose silence after the war. They return to homes rebuilt on ruins, to lives stitched back together like torn cloth. They do not speak of rifles carried, of nights spent in ambush, of poison stirred into soup. Their children grow up never knowing the full measure of what their mothers did. Perhaps it is shame, perhaps it is humility, perhaps it is the weight of memories too heavy to carry aloud. Silence becomes a second burial, hiding not just their fallen comrades but their own courage. Others tell their stories in fragments, a remark over dinner, a scar glimpsed when sleeves are rolled, a name spoken in grief and then hushed. These fragments, scattered and incomplete, hint at a vast tapestry of resistance mothers across the world, yet so many remain invisible. History remembers generals, kings, presidents, but the mothers who bore rifles, who poisoned bread, who walked with guerrillas, are left in shadows. And yet, their impact is undeniable. Armies cannot march without supplies. Occupiers cannot sleep soundly when every home might hide defiance. Guerrillas cannot survive without food, shelter, and guidance. The mothers of resistance provide all this and more. They carry grief, loss, hunger, fear, and turn it into strength. Picture a mother in Greece kneeling beside her hearth, stirring soup for her children while her husband lies buried in a shallow grave. She stirs slowly, quietly, dropping something unseen into the pot destined for German soldiers. Her children eat bread and milk. The soldiers who come to her door later that night eat something else. Within hours they fall, never knowing death was ladled into their bowls by a woman they never considered a threat. Picture a widow in Yugoslavia, crouched in the forest with a rifle. Snow covers the ground, the moon glints off her hair. Around her are young fighters, some no older than her own lost children. She is steady, calm, her breath slow as she sights down the barrel. When the convoy arrives, she fires. A grenade arcs through the air. Chaos erupts. She does not flinch. She does not cry. She is no longer simply a mother. She is resistance itself. Picture a grandmother in China, her back bent with age, carrying a basket of rice to fighters in the hills. Soldiers stop her, sneering at her hunched figure, mocking her slowness. They do not see the bullets hidden beneath the grains, the messages tucked into the lining of her basket. She nods, bows, and walks on. Her slowness disguises her purpose. Her wrinkles conceal a fire they cannot imagine. She climbs the mountain, delivers her cargo, and returns home with the silence of one who has done this many times before. Across the world, these women shape war in ways history books rarely acknowledge. They are not remembered with medals or parades. They have no monuments of marble or bronze. Their memorials are in the lives they saved, the invaders they thwarted, the children who survived because their mothers defied impossible odds. The world may call them forgotten, but in every burned village, in every hidden forest camp, in every whispered story passed from grandmother to granddaughter, they live still. Resistance is not only fought with guns and bombs. It is fought with bread baked in silence, with rifles held in trembling hands, with lullabies sung beneath the roar of warplane. The resistance mothers remind us that love and war are not opposites, that the same hands that cradle infants can cradle rifles, that the same lips that kiss children goodnight can whisper codes to guerrillas, that the same heart that breaks with loss can harden into unyielding defiance. They remind us that when war devours the world, mothers are not only victims, they are fighters, protectors, avengers. Their names may never be carved into stone, but their courage carved freedom itself into history. Not every hero carried a gun. Not every act of defiance came with a rifle raised or a grenade hurled into the dark. Some battles were quieter, crueler, fought not on muddy roads or factory floors but within the frail walls of the human body. These battles left no medals, no parades, only silence. Yet silence itself became their battlefield, a silence that still trembles with unspoken cries. Across Asia, hundreds of thousands of women were dragged from villages, cities, even their own homes. They were called comfort women, a word as cruel as the act it attempted to disguise. They were not comfort, they were captives. They were enslaved for the bodies of soldiers, their voices erased, their suffering locked in shadow. Korea, the Philippines, China, Indonesia, Burma. Across the Pacific, young girls vanished into barracks that became prisons of shame. Few returned. Those who did often spoke in whispers, if at all, because their silence was forced not just by trauma, but by the weight of societies unwilling to hear. The war ended, the soldiers went home, but the scars of these women remained invisible, unhealed. Their courage lay not in weapons, but in enduring what no one should endure, in surviving a system designed to break them. In Europe, silence became both shield and torment inside the camps. Auschwitz, Ravensbrück, Treblinka. Names that chill the tongue even now. Gates crowned with iron slogans promising work but delivering only death. Inside, women were stripped of names, replaced with numbers inked into flesh. Their hair shorn, their clothes taken, their identities erased, but not their humanity that they carried within, a fragile ember kept alive in the coldest night. In Ravensbrück, a camp built for women, silence was survival. Speaking too loudly, crying out, asking questions, these brought punishment. But within the stillness, women found ways to resist. They whispered prayers in the dark. They sang lullabies to each other, stolen fragments of normalcy. They passed scraps of bread to the weakest, knowing hunger might kill them in turn. Each act small, invisible, but each one a defiance. Their battlefield was not territory or industry, but the human soul itself. Among them was Dr. Gisela Perl, a Hungarian Jewish gynecologist who had lived a life of science, healing, and dignity before the war. At Auschwitz, her world collapsed into horror. She was ordered to tend to women under the cruel oversight of Josef Mengele. What does healing mean in a place built for death? What does medicine mean in a world where childbirth led not to life but to instant execution? Dr. Perl faced an impossible choice. To save women from immediate murder, she performed secret abortions, often in darkness, without instruments, without medicine. She carried the unbearable weight of choosing survival over birth, of fighting despair with her trembling hands. Some condemned her, others called her savior. But within the machinery of genocide, she did the only thing she could. She preserved life where life had any chance to remain. Her courage was not in gunfire, but in the quiet, bloody, desperate work of resisting death with whatever she had. The camps were filled with such choices. Who would get the crust of bread? Who would be hidden during roll call? Who would be lifted from the ground when they fell? Each choice could mean one more day of survival, and survival itself became a weapon, a refusal to let the machinery of annihilation erase every trace of existence. Not all resistance was silent. Some women smuggled messages, stole scraps of paper, and wrote diaries that outlived them. In Bergen-Belsen, Anne Frank, a child, turned words into defiance, her diary carrying her voice past the silence of death. In Ravensbrück, women carved names into walls, scratched initials into wooden bunks, fragments of identity carved against erasure. In Treblinka, women joined uprisings, setting fire to buildings, escaping into forests, carrying scars, but also proof that silence could erupt into flame. But the silence after the war may be the most haunting. Many women who survived did not tell their stories. Some could not. The weight was too great, the pain too raw. Others tried, but their words fell into ears unwilling to listen. Comfort women returned to villages only to face shame, rejection, denial. Survivors of camps often faced disbelief, as if their suffering was too immense to be real. Silence was their shield, and it lasted decades. And yet, fragments reached us. In Korea, Aging women stood decades later to testify, to speak aloud what had been stolen from them. Their voices cracked, their hands shook, but their words carried the weight of generations. They refused to die without naming what had been done. In Europe, survivors wrote memoirs, gave interviews, stood in courtrooms to face the men who had been their captors. They broke silence not only for themselves, but for those who never returned. Imagine a night in Auschwitz. Snow falls softly outside the barbed wire, muffling the cries. But inside her mind, she clings to one thing, her name, the name given by her mother. She whispers it to herself in the dark over and over until it becomes a shield. Soldiers may call her another name, may try to strip her of herself, but in silence she holds her true identity. That act, remembering, repeating, refusing to surrender her name, is her resistance. Imagine Gisela Pearl, hands trembling in the dark, leaning over a woman in agony. She has no tools, no anesthesia, no sterile space, only the strength of her will, the memory of her profession, the oath to heal. Every choice before her is unbearable, yet she chooses the path that preserves life. When the war ends, she will carry this with her forever. The ghosts of decisions no one should face. But in that moment, she defies the camp's purpose. She chooses life in the very place designed for death. The battlefield of silence is endless. It stretches from the barracks of Ravensbrück to the crowded rooms of Manila, from the brothels of Nanjing to the medical barracks of Auschwitz. It is fought in whispered prayers, in secret songs, in stolen crumbs of bread, in the courage to wake up another day and not surrender to despair. When we speak of these women, we must remember their silence was not weakness. It was survival. It was defiance. It was the only weapon left when every other had been stripped away. Their silence, painful as it is, still carries weight. It echoes across decades, calling us to listen. Today, memorials rise, testimonies are recorded, names carved into stone. Comfort women speak at rallies, their trembling voices cutting through years of denial. Survivors of camps stand before young audiences, their stories breaking the silence of generations. The world listens now, but only because they refuse to let silence be the final word. Their battlefield was the human soul, and in that battlefield, they endured. They remind us that heroism is not always loud, not always visible. Sometimes it is the quiet endurance of pain no one sees, the survival of a voice that refuses to vanish. Their silence was never empty. It was full of grief, of courage, of memory, of a strength the world too often forgot. Not every hero carried a gun, but every hero carried something, whether a rifle, a codebook, a child, or simply the unbearable weight of survival. And in that silence, history still listens. Engines roar, trembling through the night. The sky becomes a theater of thunder, streaked with smoke and fire. The world below looks up in terror or in awe, and there among the clouds are shadows with women's wings. They are daughters of farmers, teachers, seamstresses, housewives, ordinary lives lifted into extraordinary skies. The war has demanded every hand, every heart, and now every flight. The men fly to fight, the women fly to prove that the sky belongs to them too, though history will try to clip their wings. In the east, the Soviet Union summons its night witches. They are young, many barely 20, some younger still. Their aircraft are relics of a bygone era, fragile biplanes of wood and canvas, craft meant for training for crops, not for war. And yet these women climb into them willingly, engines sputtering like tired beasts, wings trembling against icy winds. At night they lift off from rough fields, guided only by stars and instinct. Their mission: harass the German front lines, drop bombs, sow fear. They cut their engines before the attack, gliding silently over the sleeping enemy. The only sound is the whisper of wings slicing through air, like broomsticks in the night. Germans below, terrified, give them the name Nachtthexen, night witches, a curse, a slur, but also an acknowledgement of power. The witches strike with bombs stitched into the fabric of their planes, then vanish back into the dark. Their losses are heavy, their bravery unshakable, each sortie another act of defiance, each flight a testament that courage is not bound by gender or machine. Some return with frost-bitten hands, their breath frozen into ice crystals against their scarves. Some never return at all, their biplanes swallowed by fire or shattered in the forests below. Yet they fly again and again, night after night, until even the German officers fear their approach, until hardened soldiers whisper prayers at the sound of wings in darkness. These women, daughters of the steppe, peasants and students alike, become legends not by the machines they flew, but by the terror they inspired. Across the ocean, another story takes flight. In America, women train under the banner of WASP, the Women Air Force Service Pilots. They do not bomb cities or dogfight against Messerschmitts, but their task is no less vital. They ferry bombers, fighters, and transports from factories to bases. They tow targets for gunners in training. They test repaired aircraft to ensure they are ready for combat. They climb into cockpits still smelling of paint, machines larger and more powerful than anything they've flown before, and they deliver them across the continent. Each takeoff is a gamble. Engines stall, landing gear fails, weather turns against them. Some die in crashes, their bodies unceremoniously buried, their service unacknowledged. They are not considered soldiers, not granted military honors. When a wasp dies, her family must pay to bring her body home. Her coffin does not drape in a flag. Yet without them, squadrons would wait in vain for the planes needed at the front. The skies they conquered were filled not with medals, but with necessity, not with glory, but with grit. In Britain, the Air Transport Auxiliary opens its doors to women as well. They fly Spitfires, Hurricanes, Lancasters, machines designed for war but flown here unarmed, unarmored, alone. Their job is to move them from one base to another, to deliver them into the hands of men waiting for battle. These women navigate with little more than a compass and a map, no radios to guide them, no weapons to protect them if enemy aircraft appear, and yet day after day they climb into cockpits, engines growling beneath their feet, and take to the skies. Imagine the roar of a Spitfire, sleek and deadly, its wings slicing the clouds. At its controls, not a celebrated ace, but a young woman in uniform, focused, steady. She will not fire its guns. She will not chase enemy planes, but she must land it safely at a distant base, threading through storms, skirting the edges of enemy patrols, guiding it to the men who will take it into battle. Her flight will never be remembered in headlines, but without her, the plane would not be there at all. Their service proves a truth long denied, that the sky belongs to women too. For years, aviation had been a man's world, its heroes carved into stone and legend. Lindbergh, Earhart, Gagarin yet to come. But these women, thousand strong, turned their wings into tools of war. They proved they could master the same machines, endure the same risks, and carry the same burdens. They proved that courage does not wear one face or one gender. Yet when the war ends, silence falls over their achievements. The night witches disband, many returning to lives of poverty, their medals few, their recognition absent. The wasps are dismissed, their records classified, their service erased from official memory for decades. The ATA pilots who braved skies over Britain returned to kitchens and factories, their names forgotten even as the planes they delivered continue to soar into history. Their wings, though unbroken, are clipped by indifference, and yet the memory remains in fragments. In Russia, veterans of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment gathered decades later, their faces lined, their voices still sharp. They recall the nights of freezing air, of engines sputtering, of bombs released into the dark. They laugh at the fear they caused, at the curses shouted by Germans below. Their eyes shine with pride, even as their names remain unknown beyond their villages. In America, long campaigns finally recognized the WASPs, granting them veteran status, though too late for many who had already passed. Their graves received the flags denied in life. Their names finally entered into the rolls of service. In Britain, the stories of ATA pilots resurface in memoirs, in quiet ceremonies where families remember mothers and grandmothers who once flew the greatest machines of the age. Picture the sky over Russia, a black canvas stitched with stars. A biplane drifts silently, its engine cut, its wings whispering through the air. Two women sit inside, goggles pressed to frozen faces, hearts pounding as they aim for the glow of enemy fires below. They release their bombs, watch the earth erupt, then pull away before the searchlights catch them. Behind them, the night swallows their flight. The soldiers below curse the witches they cannot see. Picture the desert skies of America, wide and endless. A young woman grips the controls of a massive bomber, its engines thunderous, its nose pointed toward a distant base. She checks her instruments, steadies her breath, ignores the sweat on her brow. The plane lurches in turbulence, but she holds firm. When she lands, mechanics swarm, pilots prepare. She steps down, unnoticed, already walking to her next assignment. Picture the cloudy skies of Britain, a Spitfire glinting in weak sun. A woman guides it through the mist, her hands sure, her eyes scanning the horizon. She cannot fire its gun, but she flies as if she could. When she touches down, Another pilot climbs aboard, ready to fly into battle. She watches for a moment, then turns, already thinking of the next plane to deliver. Her war is not fought in glory, but in continuity, in the quiet movement of machines that decide battle. These are the skies with women's wings, a theater of thunder, of courage, of sacrifice. Their story is not one of victory parades or marble statues, but of engines roaring in the night, of hands gripping controls, of lives risked in silence. They prove that the sky does not belong to one gender, one nation, one myth. It belongs to all who dare to rise. And rise they did, witches in the night, ferry pilots across continents, shadows in Spitfire. Their wings beat against history's silence, reminding us that even when memory tries to clip them, and they once soared, and in their flight they changed the very shape of war. The empires stretch wide, and war stretches with them, from the deserts of Africa to the monsoons of Burma, from the sugar fields of the Caribbean to the crowded streets of Calcutta. The colonies feed the furnace of conflict. Guns, grain, gold, and men flow outward to Europe and the Pacific. But behind them, unseen, unheard, are the women who made that flow possible. Daughters of empire, workers in shadows, their sweat and sacrifice poured into a war that often did not even call them citizens. Yet when the empire called, they answered. In Africa, the war came in whispers first. Rumors of Italy's march in the Horn, of German troops in North Africa, of battles that would decide who controlled the desert sands. Men were conscripted into regiments that would fight far from home, but it was women who bore the burden behind the line. They carried water to camps, buckets balanced on their heads beneath merciless sun. They tended the wounded in makeshift hospitals, sometimes with only rags to bind wounds, sometimes with nothing but songs to steady the dying. They cooked for battalions that passed through their villages. They mended uniforms. They lifted more than the empire would ever count. In the forests of East Africa, women joined guerrilla bands that resisted occupation, not with rifles always, but with endurance. They hid fighters in huts, smuggled food through thickets, carried messages across rivers. They became the invisible web holding communities together as armies trampled the land. History remembers the campaigns in deserts, the names of generals, the clash of tanks at El Alamein. But behind every march was a chain of women unrecorded whose feet walked the same dust, whose strength gave shape to survival. In India, the call of war took a different shape. Millions were drawn into the imperial machine, some willingly, many by force. While factories in Bombay and Calcutta roared with production, another story was unfolding. Lakshmi Sahgal, a doctor, a revolutionary, steps into history. She becomes commander of the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, the women's army of Subhas Chandra Bose, and the Indian National Army. Daughters of clerks, students, farmers, they march in khaki uniforms, rifles on their shoulders, eyes burning with fire for a free India. Named for Rani Lakshmibai, the queen who had once defied British rule in the uprising of 1857, this regiment carried a symbol older than the war itself. They were not just fighting against Axis powers, they were fighting against empire. In training camps in Burma, women learned to strip rifles, to crawl through mud, to march for miles under a blazing sun. They learned discipline, strategy, defiance. They stood as soldiers in a world that insisted they should remain in kitchens. For many, their war would not reach the front lines. Their regiments saw only fragments of battle before the INA collapsed under the weight of defeat. Yet the idea itself was revolutionary, that women could stand as warriors in a modern army, their fight not only for freedom from fascism, but for freedom from colonialism. Though history often buries their names, their march reverberates still, an echo of courage across borders and decades. Meanwhile, the jungles of Burma swallowed armies whole. The campaigns there were brutal. Mud, leeches, monsoon rains, malarial swamps. When the Japanese advanced, hospitals and camps were abandoned. Nurses, both local and foreign, marched barefoot for days through the forests, carrying what little they could. Some were captured, imprisoned, forced into labor. Others survived by sheer endurance, guiding the wounded through terrain that broke even seasoned soldiers. Their service was not marked by medals, but by scars, by illnesses carried long after the war ended, by silence that clung like the humidity of the jungle. Further across the seas in the Caribbean, women fought another war, a war of work. Sugar, rum, oil, bauxite. The resources of the islands became lifelines for the empire. Men labored in fields and docks, but women's hands were everywhere, sorting, carrying, cooking, sewing. In Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, women staffed auxiliary groups, tended hospitals, and supported American and British bases that sprouted across the islands. Some joined the British Auxiliary Territorial Service, leaving their homes to serve in Europe, while others kept the wheels turning on plantations that fed the imperial machine. Their stories rarely appear in the glossy histories of war. Yet in the docks where ships groaned with cargo, in the fields where sweat mixed with cane, in the barracks where soldiers prepared for departure, women's labor was the quiet spine of the effort. They carried a double burden, supporting a war not their own while enduring the weight of colonial rule. Their voices often silenced, their songs lost in the roar of machines and waves, they gave nonetheless. Across West Africa, market women played their part. They fed troops stationed in Gold Coast, Nigeria, Sierra Leone. They organized protests when prices rose, when shortages struck. They kept families alive while husbands, brothers, and sons were shipped overseas. Their resistance was not always with rifles, but with stubbornness, with survival itself. In Lagos, Accra, Freetown, their markets became both sustenance and defiance, spaces where life refused to bend entirely to war. And in South Africa, women of color, Indian black-colored, faced the contradictions of fighting for an empire that denied them equality at home. Some served as nurses, some as clerks, some as laborers. They worked in hospitals, treating white soldiers even as apartheid laws tightened around their own communities. Their patriotism was demanded but never rewarded, yet their contributions carried armies across deserts and ocean. The colonies gave not only resources but lives. Women in Ceylon monitored radar stations, watching skies for Japanese planes. In Malaya, women aided guerrillas in jungles after occupation. In Kenya, they stood in lines at recruitment offices, sometimes refused, sometimes accepted, always reminded that they were subjects, not equals. And when the war ended, the silence returned. The statues raised in London, Paris, Washington bore names of men from the metropoles. The sacrifices of colonial women were scattered in footnotes, erased in archives, whispered in families, but rarely acknowledged in nations that still bore the marks of empire. Their sweat had oiled the gears, their labor had filled the ships, their endurance had carried armies across continents, yet their names seldom carved in stone. Still, memory cling. In India, old photographs show rows of young women in khaki, rifles at their sides, eyes unflinching. In Africa, stories pass through markets and kitchens of mothers who carried water to soldiers, who kept families alive through shortages, who endured the long wait for men who never returned. In the Caribbean, songs linger of working the docks, of watching ships vanish into the horizon, of women holding communities together when the world was at war. The forgotten fronts were not marked by great battles or famous generals. They were marked by sweat in fields, by footsteps in jungles, by whispers in villages. They were marked by sacrifice that was not recorded, by courage that did not wear medals, by lives that gave without acknowledgement. These were the unsung fronts, the women of empire whose labor sustained a war that often did not even claim them as its own. Picture Africa, a woman standing at dawn, balancing water on her head, walking toward a camp of weary soldiers. Picture India, young recruits in the Rani of Jhansi regiment marching with rifles gleaming in sun, their boots striking earth in unison. Picture Burma, nurses stumbling barefoot through jungle mud, carrying wounded men whose lives depended on their endurance. Picture the Caribbean, women bent over docks, their hands tying ropes, their sweat mingling with salt air as ships groan under the weight of empire's need. These images, faint and scattered, tell a truth history tried to forget, that war is never fought by armies alone, that empires did not stand on generals but on the invisible labor of women, that the colonies were not silent, they were silenced, but still their echoes remain. In every step, every burden carried, every life held together in the storm, the unsung fronts speak. And in their speaking, they remind us no corner of the world was untouched, no woman untouched by the war that claimed to be global. Bombs fall on London. Sirens wail like lost souls. Families stumble through the night, clutching gas masks, clutching children, clutching hope. The ground shakes as walls splinter, as windows burst into shards of flying glass. Mothers press their children close, shielding with their own bodies, whispering lullabies into ears that tremble with terror. Housewives become rescue workers. They dig through rubble with bare hands, drag neighbors from burning homes, carry water in buckets to douse flames that leap like hungry beasts. In shelters deep underground, the air is thick with fear and sweat. Babies cry, dogs bark, candles flicker. Women move through the shadows, handing out bread, pouring tea, patting shoulders of strangers who are no longer strangers. Above them, the city roars with fire, but below, life holds on by the thin thread of women's endurance. They keep the shelters human, turning caves of fear into fragile havens. When bombs fall on Dresden, firestorms consume the night. The heat is so fierce it sucks air from lungs, pulling people into the blaze. Mothers run with children in their arms, their hair igniting, their voices drowned by the inferno. Women who survive dig through ruins at dawn, searching for husbands, children, neighbors. Some find bodies charred beyond recognition. Some find only silence. Yet they return day after day to sift through rubble, to salvage bricks, to cradle the wounded in cellars that smell of smoke and despair. In Nanjing, the war had already shown its most brutal face. Families scatter as soldiers invade, and women endure horrors beyond description. Some become shields, standing in doorways to protect their children. Others carry the wounded through streets slick with blood, risking everything to preserve even one life. When guns fall silent, the aftermath is left to women burying the dead, comforting the broken, stitching together the shreds of humanity left behind. Tokyo burns under waves of firebombs. Wooden homes erupt like tinder, whole neighborhoods swallowed in minutes. Women run with children strapped to their backs, water buckets clutched in desperate hands. They form lines along canals, passing water in a rhythm of survival even as the sky rains fire. Some throw themselves into rivers to escape the flames, clutching infants to their chests, praying the water will save them. Those who survive awaken to ashes, their homes gone, their lives reduced to smoke and dust. Yet even in ruin they gather, cooking rice over open fires, sharing scraps, rebuilding community from nothing. In Manila, war comes like a storm that refuses to end. Streets are filled with gunfire, with screams, with chaos. Women guide children through alleys, carrying water, carrying what little food remains. When bombs collapse buildings, they crawl into the ruins, pulling out the injured, steadying hands that shake with terror. The war does not ask permission. It invades kitchens, nurseries, markets. Women, unarmed and unprepared, become the last defense against despair. In every city under siege, the same scenes unfold. Housewives who once worried about bread or laundry now become firefighters, medics, guardians of their neighborhoods. They climb ladders to smother flames on rooftops. They crawl into shattered basements to rescue strangers. They organize ration lines, making meager food stretch to feed whole families. They turn scraps of cloth into bandages, scraps of wood into crutches, scraps of hope into survival. Children's hands tremble in the dark. Mothers steady them, hiding their own fear behind smiles. They invent games in shelters, turning the roar of bombs into background noise for stories. They sing lullabies over the rattle of machine guns, whisper prayers while brushing dust from small faces. Empty chairs gather at tables. Fathers gone to war, brothers missing, sons buried. Women keep the household breathing even when half its heart is gone. In Coventry, after the Blitz, women walked through streets where churches had collapsed into rubble, where shops were gutted by flame. They carried shovels, brooms, hammers. They built soup kitchens from ruins, feeding the displaced. They stood in ration queues for hours, then returned home to nurse the wounded, to patch holes in walls, to sweep glass from floors. Their strength was not born of choice, but of necessity. They held the city upright when it might have collapsed under grief. In Hamburg, firestorms turned night into day, shadows of women carrying buckets flickering against walls of flame. In Warsaw, women smuggled food through sewers, carried messages across barricades, hid children in basements. They risked beatings, imprisonment, execution. Yet they went on because the war had turned their streets into battlefields and their homes into front lines. There were no medals for the woman who pulled a neighbor's child from rubble, no statues for the mother who carried water through fire, no parades for those who stitched wounds in cellars by candlelight. Yet without them, cities would have fallen not just in bricks but in spirit. They became the spine of endurance, invisible but unbreakable. The war at home was not silent. It was the crash of bombs, the crackle of flames, the cry of children, the steady rhythm of women's footsteps carrying burdens too heavy to name. It was the silence afterward, when they sat among ruins, staring at empty chairs, listening for voices that would never return. It was the quiet work of rebuilding, of patching walls, of planting seeds in scorched earth, of teaching children to laugh again. Picture London at dawn, smoke still rising from craters, women sweeping glass from streets, opening shops with shattered windows, boiling kettles in kitchens without roofs. Picture Dresden, women kneeling among ruins, laying flowers where churches once stood, lighting candles in memory of the thousands lost. Picture Tokyo, women gathering water from canals, cooking rice for neighbors in streets reduced to ashes. Picture Manila, women holding children close, singing lullabies into a night pierced by gunfire. These women did not choose the war. But the war chose them. It entered their homes, their kitchens, their nurseries. It tore apart their families, their neighborhoods, their cities. Yet still they endured. Still they carried water to flames, dug through rubble, steadied trembling hands. Still they proved that courage is not only found on battlefields, but in kitchens turned into hospitals, in shelters turned into sanctuaries, in the silence of women who kept the world breathing while it burned. The year is 1945. The guns fall silent. The parades swell through avenues where only months before rubble lay thick as snow. Flags unfurl, brass bands march, speeches proclaim victory, the world exhales. But beneath the roar of triumph, another sound emerges, quiet, restrained, a fading echo. Women who had carried nations on their backs, who had fought, flown, healed, spied, labored, resisted, now stand at the edges of the crowd. Their uniforms are folded into trunks, their tools are put away, their stories begin to disappear. Thank you for your service, some are told. But the words are hollow, followed by commands to return. Return to kitchens, return to nurseries, return to silence. The war that opened doors now slams them shut. Women who had riveted planes are told the factories no longer need them. Nurses who had commanded wards are replaced by men resuming peacetime authority. Spies who risked torture in cellars are dismissed without ceremony, their files locked away, their names forgotten. In the aftermath, the world wants normalcy, and normalcy demands their erasure. Some resist, holding on to memory by putting pen to paper. Memoirs emerge, thin, fragile volumes, often self-published. A nurse describes nights in Bataan, watching friends starve. A pilot recalls the roar of engine, the loneliness of clouds. A resistance fighter recounts the weight of a pistol hidden in a loaf of bread. But these stories reach only a few, overshadowed by tomes of generals, by films of soldiers, by statues of men cast in bronze. The women who dared to remember are drowned by a tide of selective memory. Most remain unspoken. Silence becomes the final uniform they wear. They tuck their memories into the folds of ordinary life, into family stories told at kitchens and bedsides. A daughter hears her mother speak once, only once, about carrying messages under occupation. A granddaughter finds a medal in a drawer, its ribbon frayed, its significance unknown. A diary rests in an attic, its pages brittle with dust, unread until decades later. Their legacies survive not in monuments but in whispers, fragile as breath. The world moves forward quickly, eager to bury the war with its graves. Cities rebuild, economies grow, nations redraw their maps. Women are pulled back into roles expected of them, housewives, secretaries, caretakers. The taste of freedom, of competence, of recognition fades like smoke after fire. The Rani of Jhansi regiment disbands, its members folded back into anonymity. The night witches return to Soviet farms, their heroism unrecognized, their pensions meager. The wasps wait decades for their service to be acknowledged. Nurses who endured camps bury their scars beneath polite smiles. For so many, the war becomes an unspoken ghost, lingering but never named. And yet memory cannot be erased entirely. It lingers in forgotten cemeteries where weeds climb over stones carved with names few remember. It hums in songs sung by elders, folk tunes reshaped into laments of hunger, of fire, of survival. It slips into stories told to children at bedtime. Tales of a grandmother who once wore boots instead of slippers, who once stood unflinching in the face of despair. These are not the monuments of marble and granite. They are monuments of memory, fragile, living, fleeting, but stubborn enough to survive. The quiet fade of memory is not just absence. It is a deliberate choice by nations that celebrated men and sidelined women. Statues rise to generals, to politicians, to leaders who signed treaties. Streets are named for victories, not for those who held families together through bombing. Holidays honor battles, not the kitchens turned into hospitals, the shelters turned into sanctuaries. Silence becomes policy and silence becomes tradition. Generations grow up learning of Normandy, of Midway, of Stalingrad, rarely of the women who carried those battles on their backs from the shadows. But even silence has cracks. Survivors sometimes gather decades later to tell their stories. Old women with hair white as snow sit in circles, remembering nights when they flew biplanes or ferried bombers. They laugh at the absurdity of their courage. They cry at the memory of friends who never returned. Their voices are frail, but their words are fire. Some finally receive medals, though too late for many. Some finally see their names inscribed in archives. Recognition comes like a belated apology, a whisper against decades of forgetting. For others, the recognition never arrives. Their graves remain unmarked. Their sacrifices remain hidden. Their names survive only in the stories families carry across generations. A photograph on a mantle, a letter folded in a drawer, a song sung softly in another tongue. Memory is not entirely lost, but it is fragile, dependent on those who care enough to preserve it. Think of the woman who returned from the jungle, her feet scarred from leeches, her body weakened by malaria, her heart heavy with grief. She lives quietly in a small house, never speaking of the war. But sometimes when her grandchildren play outside, she hums a tune from that time, a melody of endurance, and the children listen without knowing its meaning. That is her monument. Think of the woman who once flew a Spitfire across English skies, unarmed, unafraid. She now waters her garden, neighbors seeing only a gentle presence, never imagining the roar of engines in her past. Her medals, if she kept them, lie in a box beneath her bed, but in her eyes, when she looks to the horizon, there is still the memory of flight, of freedom. That is her monument. Think of the woman who carried messages through occupied Paris, who risked torture for a single slip of paper. She returned after the war, opened a small shop, lived quietly. Her children never knew why she sometimes woke at night gasping, clutching the sheets. Only when she died did they find the false passport, the coded letters hidden in a box. That is her monument. The quiet fade of memory is not the same as forgetting. It is a test. Whether we will seek out these fragments, whether we will piece together their stories from whispers and ruins. For every woman erased from textbooks, there is still a trace waiting to be uncovered, a name in a ledger, a song passed down, a photograph, edges frayed. Memory waits in silence, demanding someone to listen. The war gave them no monuments, but perhaps none were needed. Their true monument is the world that survived because of them. The children who grew into adults because mothers steadied their hands in the dark. The cities that rebuilt because women shoveled rubble and carried water. The freedoms preserved because women fought in shadows, in skies, in jungles. Every brick laid, every life saved, every flame extinguished is a testament carved not in stone, but in survival. Still, silence has its cost. Without stories, without names, their lives risk dissolving into myth, into abstraction. They become the women of the war, faceless, nameless, anonymous. To honor them requires more than acknowledgement. It requires listening, searching, preserving. It requires holding their echoes close, refusing to let them fade entirely into silence. Picture the end of the war again. The parades, the flags, the cheering crowds. Amid them, a woman walks home, her uniform folded under her arm, her face turned downward. She slips into her house, closes the door, begins cooking dinner. Outside, the world celebrates. Inside, she carries memories too heavy to speak. She will live the rest of her life quietly, but the war will never leave her. Her silence, her resilience, her endurance, these are the unbuilt monuments. The forgotten army never asked for statues. They never demanded parades. They never wrote their names on banners. They gave, and then they disappeared into ordinary life. Yet their absence in memory is not proof of insignificance. It is proof of the world's blindness. For they were the ones who kept the world breathing while it burned, who rebuilt it when the fires died, who passed it forward to generations that never knew their name. And so, in forgotten cemeteries, in whispered songs, in family stories passed to children, their echoes still remain. Not carved in stone, but carved in survival. Not written in marble, but written in lives. The guns fell silent, the flags rose, the parades marched. But beneath the noise of victory, the quiet fade of memory began. Still, in every breath of freedom, in every life spared, their presence endures.